Well, hello, everybody. A warm welcome to our first briefing event, virtual or in person, of 2023. Briefing the publication for the work and worlds of legal business leaders like yourselves, if you are new to us for this event. I'm Richard Brent. I'm the head of content and also the editor-in-chief here at Briefing, which I hope you know is now available as an excellent app on both Apple and Android devices. So head over to your app store to see our written content if you haven't before. Briefing regularly features interviews with a wide range of strategic and operational leaders like those that we're hearing from today, heading up all the different core business functions, perspectives on all the big business trends, case studies of specific change projects, technology-based or otherwise, and also market-leading data research, such as our Briefing Frontiers series about the intersection of technology and strategy, which we publish around this time every year and is coming out next month. We cover every aspect of legal business management in our content mix throughout the year, from business development to knowledge management, risk mitigation, process improvement, new approaches to people management and engagement, of course, and the energies that feed into and the outcomes that flow out of efforts to innovate in all corners of the modern law firm. The topic today is simply, or perhaps not so simply, the range of opportunities that can be unlocked with the right handle on your underlying business data, the investment that's required to reach that key to success. Recent briefing research that we have produced has found that firms are pretty split on whether they've even got data as an active strategic pillar, if they know whether they do indeed. And they're perhaps therefore not sure where to start. So I'm delighted to have strategic leader representatives from two firms that we think are towards the forefront in this regard, Allen Overy and Clyde & Co. We'll be hearing about objectives for both internal operational improvement and also client relationships, and how new levels of visibility or interaction might manage to drive performance and profitability on both of those fronts. And crucially, we'll also be probing a bit at the roots of growing a more data-first culture in a law firm, where people have not only confidence in the numbers and the narratives that go alongside them, but they're also engaged in those pieces of information as drivers of potential change. And evolving platforms are, of course, meanwhile, enabling that data to be integrated, sliced, and served up in new ways, possibly involving prizing it out of aging legacy systems and into new contexts for the workplace of today. This session this morning is also in partnership with the intelligent finance platform OneStream. Thank you to them, who have also supported us on our Briefing Frontiers research this year into the strategic journey for law firms across a range of different levers. Among other things, many other things, OneStream helps firms to stay agile in identifying changing risks and opportunities through blending financial and operational data sets. I'll be chatting to them a bit later. A reminder that the whole of the next hour's conversation, though, is being recorded and later distributed to the briefing audience. We've also got time for any of your questions. Please do ask them, pose them in the chat as usual here on Zoom. We may take them throughout the course of the conversations. We may leave them until the end, and I will put them to our speakers on your behalf. Indeed, if you would prefer to ask a question live, then you can also do that. If you raise your hand and come on mic, you can speak to us. And without further ado, then it's now over to our first speaker. That's Chris Pannell, who's head of business data at Allen Overy, and he's going to talk us through the foundations of his firm's data strategy. Thanks very much, Chris, and over to you.
Great, thank you, Richard. Just checking that you can see the video coming up there.
I've got you, yes. Thank you. Got the first slide.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Morning, everybody, and thank you for your time today. I'm here to talk to you about how an evolutionary approach can be a helpful way of defining and delivering on a data strategy in a law firm. And I think we're all on the call today because we understand that the use of data in law firms is a hot topic. If you search on Google for law firm data strategy, you'll turn up over 256 million results, which is amazing in itself. And I think this is only going to get more focus in the future. If you've been thinking about the implications of ChatGPT recently, think about what the world might look like in the boardroom if ChatGPT as an interface is plugged into a learning model trained on your firm's data. So data is central to a number of conversations going on, certainly at our firm at the moment, and I suspect in your firms as well. So framing the conversation a little bit, leaders in law firms today often have an objective around bringing data together across different sources to enable a richer picture and more informed decision making. So in the course of the next 15-20 minutes, I just want to talk through why having a data strategy is helpful. I want to talk about what that looks like at Allen Overy in particular and what it means to us and where we are with it. And then I think some practical tips, hopefully, in terms of how to get the conversation started at your own firms or to develop existing conversations if you're already along the path. And then finally, I just want to focus on some of the concrete outcomes that you can expect to deliver with a more conscious focus, I suppose, on connected data. So hopefully that makes sense for the next 15-20 minutes. But before we dive into the content, a little bit about my team at the firm. We're an IT team. It's helpful to understand we sit within the IT function. The data and workflow platform team was created a couple of years ago now to help deliver the IT strategy of connecting data sets more effectively across the business to provide value. We've got responsibilities, you'll see from the slide, across a number of different areas. We tend to focus on the low-code, no-code platforms rather than being software engineering or data engineering. But we do work very closely with both of those teams to help deliver the architecture for what we're building. And you'll see bottom of the diagram there, and central to everything that we're doing is this concept that we call the trusted data platform. And with the trusted data platform, our aim really, and this is the strapline for my team around data specifically, is delivering faster access to trusted data that helps to solve business problems. And I bolded a few of the key words. We thought hard about this statement and tried to encapsulate a vision for what the team is all about in a short, succinct sentence. So the words are carefully chosen. And I think fast access is important. As we go forward, our businesses are moving quickly. The world is moving quickly. So how can we leverage the platforms and build architectures that allow us to bring that data together more quickly to answer some of the business challenges of the day? Clearly, the data has to be trusted too, otherwise people will go back to old habits. They'll go and find data from other sources that they do trust. So it's key to us that we have trusted data on the platform that people are confident that they can use. And then finally, this is around solving business problems. This is a project enabled by technology. It's not a data project nor a technology project in its own right. We only exist as a team in A&O in order to provide data through to people to help solve those business problems. If you approach it as a technology project or a pure data project, I think you'll lose business sponsorship fairly quickly for your efforts. So thinking a little bit more about the trusted data platform and really zooming in on that, it's kind of key to what our strategy is. And the conceptual diagram that we've got on the left-hand side really just builds up from the bottom through to the top layer. So you read the diagram from bottom up. And it really shows our plans for around how we want to connect data from 4 of our principal internal data domains. We call them people, clients, money, and work. And they really align to our CTO's IT strategy more generally. But for those names, you can read things like HR and people systems, BD and marketing systems, finance and practice management systems, knowledge systems, and legal technology. And the concept really is that we want to flow information from those small building blocks at the bottom through a series of control gates and connected data, out ideally through a data catalog at some point in the future, and presenting that out to a number of different applications, data consuming applications and tools and use cases towards the top of that diagram. And data can be presented from this platform in different shapes for different needs. Clearly, the data workload that you need for an application is different for what you need for an analytics project or a data science project. And I think we've been quite careful in our choice of language here. We call it the Trusted Data Platform. That language has been in use now probably for 18 months. And what's encouraging for me is we're able now to talk to the IT board about the Trusted Data Platform and to other teams around what we're trying to achieve. And that language is beginning to resonate and be played back to us, which is a really good indication, I think, that the understanding of the concept of what we're trying to build is beginning to take hold. I think the other point I want to talk through here is this is really a federated model. This is not about the IT team trying to grab everybody else's data and pull it into a single monolithic data warehouse. This is about working as an enabling team to help other people be great with the data that they've got. And Allen Overy has an excellent history and excellent teams in the various functional domains of finance, people, and marketing that do an excellent job of operational reporting, management information, and so on at the moment. So the Trusted Data Platform really is how can we take that expertise to the next level by breaking down some of the functional silos that exist and bringing that data together. And at the same time, if we can be more ambitious with our use of external data, that's something I think that we're challenged on, frankly, at the moment, and would be good to think about how we can bring some of those external data sources into our platform. After all, we don't own the problem defining the world's data model. We're focused on building the data model that's right for Allen Overy, and there are perfectly acceptable external data sources that we can bring in to enrich our picture. So I'm not going to talk too much about the architecture on this call. We work with the data engineering team, as I've said, but I will just talk about the fact that we've chosen to implement with our strategic alliance with Microsoft. Our Trusted Data Platform sits on an Azure technology. And when we talk about the Trusted Data Platform, it's really a collection of associated Azure technologies rather than being a single thing that you can reach out and touch. Okay, so we're using Azure to make this happen. And ultimately, the role of the TDP, the Trusted Data Platform, is to present the same data to different people in different ways, depending on their need. What do they need to use the data for? It remains a source of truth, hopefully, for people who have come to collect data from it. But it's also a reflection of the ground source truth that sits in our main systems of choice. So our practice management system, our CRM system, our HR platform remain the golden sources of information. And the Trusted Data Platform is a reflection of that data that's connected across the functional domains. And we hope to shape that into different workloads to allow application developers to more quickly build apps that plug into the data platform to provide rich experiences for lawyers and our people. It's about business intelligence and data science. We have a talented team of data scientists who we're working with on a number of projects at the moment who are able to come to the data platform to pull the workload off that they need for their work. And more recently, we're beginning to look at how the platform can be used to help with some of our data integration problems. So orchestrating the movement of data across various systems. But the key to it really is it's multiple views on a single source of truth. So how do we get started? I think what I want to talk to you about, this evolutionary approach, is really kind of key to the way that we've begun to make some progress. And I'll talk to you about some of the tips and tricks that helped us along the way. So in terms of starting the conversation, I think there are two broad approaches that you could possibly take to get going on this. I think there's a traditional sort of waterfall, big upfront design approach where you try and think about every possible caveat and situation that might arise along the way. Inevitably, that will be a very big plan, a very complex plan, and probably take a fairly significant amount of time to deliver. There's lots of teams to get involved, lots of different opinions on what the right thing to do is. And frankly, the complexity of the challenge could be a blocker. You might end up freezing in the light of all of the challenges that you foresee. I think crucially as well, the business benefits in a program structured like that remain a distant prospect. And it's really difficult to talk to the business about the value that data can bring if your project is always 2 or 3 years away. And the last point really is that the technology in this space is moving incredibly quickly. So if you design and architect your solution on technology that's available today, by the time you deliver your grand vision, it's likely that there's better technology or more efficient technology available to you in some way, shape, or form. So by contrast, and the evolutionary approach that I talked about at the start of the call is really to break the big problem down. This isn't rocket science. It's really just saying, how do we take what could be a really big, complex project and start to break that down into simpler steps? How can we deliver value more quickly? How can we build some real examples that give some idea to people who aren't close to this, who aren't living and breathing this, real examples of the power of connected data? Frankly, if you're starting a new team like mine, there's certainly an aspect of building confidence, of building credentials, that you know what you're doing and that you can be trusted to work with other teams and their data. I think the other thing is that demonstrating outcomes builds advocacy. And I think for us, one of the most powerful sets of advocates are the partners that have enjoyed some of the successes of some of the tools that we've now got into their hands. And when you start to get partners in a law firm talking about, isn't this a great piece of technology that's being delivered? It's great that I can access this information on the go. You start to find that spreads quite quickly through the organization, and those conversations start to become easier in new situations. Certainly, the technology can be improved as you go using this approach. So you can, and we have experienced through the data engineering team, actually already evolved away from some architectural patterns that we started this journey on. We've actually refactored some of the data engineering pipelines once or twice already to make them more efficient and to take advantage of new technology that's being released. So if an evolutionary approach is a good way of breaking this big problem down, how do you explain that to lawyers who are trained to expect often perfection in everything that they're dealing with? So this was what I had done, and it's just one slide from a slide deck that I thought would be interesting to show you today. This is something that I took to our IT board to explain the concept of an evolutionary approach. And really what this is about building up business-focused, business-facing use cases that allow you to start to incrementally explore and bring on data domains at different levels and different paces, and to build a thin slice of the architecture for what you need now. So rather than doing that big project and delivering something in 12 or 18 months, deliver something small with a small number of data points that you understand really well, and build the thin slice through the technical architecture that you need in order to deliver that use case. We started with the people data model, and I'll talk about usage of high leverage data sets in a moment, because the people data model in a law firm repeats over and over again. It's required in a number of different situations and scenarios, and if you can leverage those high touch use cases, you can deliver more quickly across a broad variety of applications. So really the takeaway from this slide is that you need to think about use cases that are relevant to your business, and then build the maturity of both the richness of the data on your platforms and the sophistication of the underlying technology. Good. So if we sold a vision and we've started to create some momentum, what can we be doing to continue that? Here are some tips and tricks that I found useful along the way. Certainly it's about talking to lawyers, identifying a pressing need. It can really help to sharpen focus and remove barriers. And for us, really, the COVID crisis and the management of risk around the COVID crisis was really our entry point into getting started with Power BI. We were challenged to provide a global view of building occupancy across A&O's global network in 2 or 3 weeks. And that really cleared a number of barriers for us, because we were working directly with a managing partner and office managing partners around the world. We're really focused on helping lawyers make decisions and take action, or to simplify their ways of working. And we've used tools in a number of ways that I'll show you in a moment about how that works. We haven't necessarily waited for the data to be perfect. I think we probably all understand that there's always more that you can be doing to scrub and clean your data. But actually surfacing data, even if it's not 100% accurate, can show the need for convergence on things like definitions, or a better focus on data quality, or business processes that underpin the platform. Speed can sometimes, not always, can sometimes be traded for accuracy. In those early days of getting our dashboards onto Power BI for managing building occupancy, we knew that we could only be about 95% accurate, but having a 95% accurate view of what was going on was better than having no visibility at all. So there's a trade-off often between speed and accuracy if you state your assumptions in an open way. I'm a big fan of open relationships with information security and in-house legal. And what we found helpful here is to build policies, not for use cases, but for platforms. So I have a single DPIA for the trusted data platform that we worked on about 18 months ago with our in-house legal and infosec teams. And then we iterate on that. So my commitment every month is to talk to those groups and tell them about what's coming down the pipeline. And we identify anything that might be high risk. And then we can have that conversation in an open way and augment that framework-based DPIA to allow us to keep going with velocity. Clearly, you need to be making, if you're using this approach, you need to be confident that you've got the technology support around you in data engineering, in your architecture teams to make decisions that are flexible for the future. You don't want to lock yourself in to a certain architecture that won't scale or won't anticipate the next demand or need. And then finally, and this can be quite fun, is start a conversation about data. This is about trying to drive up general awareness of what data can do and trying to get people excited about it. So one thing I've found quite interesting to do is take some data that you're familiar with or your teams are familiar with and look at it in a different way that people haven't looked at it before. And data visualization is an excellent way of helping people to see familiar metrics differently. Pictures help to get the conversation going. And what I've got on the screen at the moment is something that I printed and put on the wall behind me, behind my desk, deliberately with no labeling and no clue as to what it represented, in order to get people curious about what was on the charts. So this is an example of something that I put together in the early days of a new performance management approach at Allen Overy to see the patterns in real-time feedback between people. So each circle on the diagram represents a real-life person, and the colors represent practice groups, functions, and role levels. And the lines between the dots connect individuals. They are instances of feedback given from one person to another. The larger the circle, the more active the contribution to the feedback network. And they tell an interesting story. They yield some interesting observations, but they're not particularly actionable. So on the left, you can see that feedback tends to flow between people in the same groups or functions, which is probably natural. On the right, you can see that this person whose dot is larger than the others is a really big net contributor to the feedback network. This person appears to be engaged. How might we engage them further to amplify their contribution? And then what's going on with the constellation of people around the outer ring, those people that have chosen never to provide feedback in the tool at all? Why is that? What's going on with that group of people? So it's not particularly actionable, but it's not meant to be. It's really just about getting people curious about data. And the takeaway from this slide, I suppose, is to take a familiar metric at your firm and look at it differently. Try taking something like fee earner business, for example, and looking at the distribution of fee earner business rather than the summary metric of average fee earner business over the last 3 months. You just might be surprised at what the underlying distribution looks like. And that gets hidden when you summarize and aggregate to summary level statistics. So I'll briefly talk through some of the areas of focus for us now with our data-led approach. Here are some of the things that are top of mind at the moment for us that demand that we bring data together in order to find solutions. So our single view of client is about building richer pictures of our client relationships. What matters are we working on? Who has a relevant experience? What's the financial performance of the matter? When did we last meet the client? Who met them? When and where did they meet? All of these things require us to bring data from the various domains that we talked about earlier under the trusted data platform and bring them together into a single view. With work allocation, I think that's a really interesting, or almost the perfect use case for connected data. It brings together people data, their legal qualifications, their skills, legal skills at a deep technical level, language proficiencies, their development needs, where they need help, where do they want to develop their careers. It brings together matters from the finance system, information barriers too. This area really abounds with the need to connect across those functional silos. Matter profitability and predictors of matter profitability is something relatively new for us at A&O, but we're working with the data science team, looking at features of deals that we've done in the past and trying to correlate or understand whether there's a correlation between deal features and matter profitability. And that can only be done by linking data across data sets. Matter intelligence I won't dwell on now. It's more of a knowledge-focused application, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But this is really helping to link legal work product, deals, documents, clauses to market trends, and linking those legal precedents to the work that we're doing in a more connected way. I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. And then finally, with the future space planning, we're bringing together data on the usage of our buildings, the usage of our internal services like the restaurants, the cafes, and the gym, to optimize our use of the building and our real estate for a hybrid working future. And hopefully to build a more greener office for the future so that we know when to heat the building and which floors need to be heated. So all of this is about pulling data together from different sources. And we talked about matter intelligence, and I think as it stands, this is probably our most connected example of what we've done. So this is really leveraging the low-code, no-code Power Platform, providing partners with a very simple form that they complete at a certain part of their matter lifecycle within a particular group within banking. This has been supported with a PSL council who's worked with us on defining what this looks like and what matter data points they need to capture. There's an element of curation where somebody is in the team is able to just look at the deals that have been submitted coming through the workflow to make sure that the documents are linked, and then they can publish that through to Power BI to visualize that. And what we're seeing, and I'll show you some feedback in a moment of how this has been well received. It's small. It's only 18 partners using this piece of technology, but the feedback that we're beginning to get is really encouraging. And I think it's showing how data can flow seamlessly. There's no human hand involved once we get past the curation stage. Once it's marked ready to go to Power BI, that information becomes available in a lockdown way to the partners who occupy that part of the business. And the really great thing that they like is that it can drill through any of the charts that they've got, the familiar metrics, and get to the underlying documents that were part of the deal that they were working on. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these slides in detail. I just had a number of different Power BI report examples that we've got live running in production today. And they span the whole gamut from further deal intelligence type applications, building access applications, desk occupancy, looking at how people are using our internal business services workflow tools, how occupied our meeting rooms are, what people think about the IT services that we provide. We're doing some things with the knowledge team around how their knowledge collections are being used. We're starting to look at how A&O is impacting the environment through our business travel and carbon emissions. And finally, we're using it for surveys and feedback and risk and regulation around some of our training compliance. So understanding whether our lawyers are meeting their training compliance needs. So just a selection really of some of the things that we've been enabled to do, some of the outcomes that we've delivered through a more connected view of the data. And I'm coming to a close. And in that close, I just want to share some of the feedback that we've had from real people in the organization consuming some of what we've pushed out so far. And I've paused on this piece of feedback because the piece in bold is really, really important to me. This is a senior partner in the leveraged finance team who professes quite openly not to have been really great at collecting deal data before, but now having a mobile app in her hand, being able to dial up what's market for A&O in her particular sector, has really changed her view on the value of capturing that data in the first place. And I think if you can start to see examples of behavior change, that gives you encouragement that hopefully you're heading in the right direction, albeit you've got a long way to go. And then the rest of the feedback that we're getting is positive too, across a number of different solutions that we've built. I'll just leave those on the slide just for a moment for people to scan rather than talk through. Okay. So what's next for us with this evolutionary approach? Well, I think one thing I'm conscious of is that we've been in startup mode. I think that's fair to say. We've been given permission to break things a little bit, maybe to work not quite in the way that other teams are working, but we're reaching the end of that phase now. We've got to move now from that kind of small team startup mentality to something which is fit for the firm at scale. So really we need to move to that scaling up piece. And key to all of that is data governance and data governance strategy. So very next on our roadmap is to work with our subject matter expert teams in finance, in HR, marketing and risk and legal technology to understand how we want to govern our data, to make sure that we've got the right data stewards in the various teams, to make sure that the quality of what we're pulling into the trusted data platform remains high quality, and we preserve the trusted nature of the platform. We're busy developing internal training for Power BI, both at a surface level for people who are consuming, so they understand how to get the most out of our reports that we're publishing, but also for teams who are interested in creating their own content. And next week, we're doing an accelerator session with our finance colleagues, where we hope to start pointing them and signposting them through to some resources that will help them embrace this change. We would love to connect more data on the platform. That's essential to keep the vision of the trusted data platform going, but that now needs to be done in that more governed way, as I say. And we'll continue to deliver data-driven apps for lawyers. We have a plan to deliver more around the matter intelligence frameworks over the course of the next 3 to 6 months. There's a number of different groups that have looked at the LevFin app that I just talked you through, who've come back with very similar requirements, and quite excited to see what we can do for them using a similar approach and similar technology. So I hope this has been useful as a quick overview of what we're doing at Allen Overy. I'm happy to take questions now, or I can leave Richard to pick the questions up later. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Chris. I loved seeing those visualizations of the engagement patterns, and I'm pleased to see we have had some engagement with your own presentation. So I'm going to put some of these questions to you, if that's okay. And if anyone out there does have a burning question, now is the time to speak up. Do not wait. So Chris, Aileen Johnson first says great presentation, thank you very much, and then she asks, could you tell us just in some general terms who is on the team that has enabled you to deliver what you've delivered so far?
Sure, absolutely, no problem. So we are a collaborative team, hopefully, that spans across internal teams, both in IT and more generally. So I think if you look at my own team, we're currently a team of 9 supporting those 5 boxes that we had on the slide at the start. And we really cover the trusted data platform piece and Power BI, the RPA piece, and so on. Where we've worked with other teams and had to bring expertise in, we've had significant input and effort from data engineering, another expert IT team that work with us. We've had to work with my ex-HR colleagues as we brought the people data onto the platform. So I used to head up the HR systems team at Allen Overy. So a lot of this has been about trying to leverage those relationships to bring that data onto the platform as something that you can use over and over again. We've worked very closely with in-house legal and information security. And as we go forward, and we're entering a new period, as I said, we need to be working far more closely, I think, with some of the other teams out there. Finance in particular are top of mind right now, because we've got some really interesting use cases that we want to enable the finance team to get going on. So it's a team effort, and really it's about trying to connect the right people with the right skills to build this out.
Right, interesting, thank you. An anonymous question, have you started remodeling or moving your data to a centralized source of some description, for example, a data lake concept, or are you working with data where it resides at the moment?
Yeah, so the architecture, which I deliberately didn't go through, Richard, in too much detail. Yeah, we have an Azure data lake, which is essentially our landing zone and our ingestion point for data into the platform. So I think our approach is that that's where we want to bring data together and connect it. We need to do a lot more around making sure that we're talking about the same thing as we're connecting across functional domains. So something like an employee ID in the HR system is a timekeeper ID in the finance system, and those are 2 different terms for the same identifier. Very clearly, we need to be very, very clear about what identifiers we're going to be using and how those things kind of relate to one another, and think about the synonyms for the same data point. So yeah, we have a lake at the heart of all of this. And then we use a Synapse SQL SAT on top of that to present data through to services like Power BI and Power Apps.
Okay, thank you. And actually, jumping straight onto that last point, another anonymous attendee says, have you encountered any issues with the interface between Power Apps and Power BI when it comes to filtering data?
That's a really interesting question. So, yeah, so we build, not yet, I think, but we may not yet have pushed the limits. What we're doing is relatively simple. So we work with the data engineering team to create stored procedures that we're able to access information through from a service account in Power BI. We make use of the Power BI service and the on-premise data gateway in order to come through into the internal network to pick up data from internal sources. And I think a live discussion at the moment is the extent to which we work with software engineering to build a more API-based approach to this. A lot of what we're doing at the moment is SQL-based still, but what we want to explore is how can we make use of APIs for certain data workloads. But as it stands, we found the Power Platform in particular to be incredibly well connected. Once we've got data in the trusted data platform, we can surface it in pretty much any of the Microsoft tools, be that Outlook or Power Apps or Power BI, relatively seamlessly.
Okay, thank you. The questions are flowing in now. We may not have time to cover all of them, just saying for the attendees. We will, however, try to get answers to them from Chris a bit later. But I'm going to do one more, if that's all right, because it's particularly topical, I think. David Workman asks, have you got any plans to take this great work you've done, his words there, and use it within chatbots or AI of some other description?
That's a phenomenally topical question, isn't it? I think. Yeah. I was reading an interesting piece by the head of data at Ernst & Young a couple of days ago that really gave me pause for thought, actually, and has triggered some thoughts just this week in terms of our future direction and where we need to go. But he was imagining a world in which you invite a ChatGPT-like interface to the boardroom. So rather than turning up with dashboards and KPIs, you rock up with an interface to something like ChatGPT, and you use that as a live source for discovering your data sets. Now, all of that is really only possible if you've got a really strong data model that sits behind it, and particularly some form of knowledge graph representation or ontology that describes your law firm so that the bot can make sense of your domain. Yeah. So coming back to David's question, I think one of the things on the long list to do right now is to start thinking about how we more formally describe the data domains in ontological terms that would allow us potentially to make use of chatbot-like functionality in the future. There's no need to necessarily inquire through a Power BI dashboard. You could ask a chatbot, what's the firm's headcount as at last month, or what's average fee in a business today.
Interesting, fascinating. In fact, thank you so much, Chris. I hope you'd be happy to take any other questions later down the line. But I think we will now move on because I do want to hear plenty of detail from another law firm. So I'm going to say thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks very much for your time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And I'm now joined by Harsh Amarasuriya. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Harsh, Global Head of Financial Pricing and Analysis at Clyde & Co, and also Paul Suffield at our partner, OneStream Software. Hi, Harsh and Paul.
Hi, Richard. Well done on the pronunciations. Very good.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good to know. Good afternoon. Good morning, rather, here. So we're probably going to touch on some common themes. I think you've both just seen Chris's presentation. But to start off with, Harsh, could you tell us a little bit about your role at Clyde & Co, and perhaps a little bit about where you've come from, because I know you've worked across sectors, haven't you?
Yep. Yeah. So I at the moment head up global FP&A. It's very, very quickly evolving to sort of a global data role. I mean, a lot of FP&A resonates around metrics and evaluating performance. I've been in that space across multiple industries. I've been at Clyde & Co for 6 years, but prior to that, I was in financial institutions, banking, manufacturing, and also in multiple countries. So I've seen the evolution of data over the last 15 or 20 years. I think legal is particularly, through COVID and stuff, the value of data was accelerated quite a lot. And a lot of what Chris mentioned earlier resonates with us, where, lots of people wanted to know, office utilization and how busy people were. And particularly as they no longer saw directly in the offices, they had no choice but to rely on data. And I think that has been, in our functions as people who work with data, that's been a real sort of eye-opener for the rest of the business for the value of that function. And with that comes the value of lots of tools and, lots of people who help visualize those elements.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll dig into some of that a little more. But before that, Paul, I gave a very quick introduction to OneStream at the start, but tell us a little bit about what you do there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an account director here at OneStream, and essentially what we look at is, and this is born out of other industries as well, is how we can take a lot of the work that Chris was talking to in terms of taking that data strategy and then helping to scale that out across finance and operations to start to provide that value of insight then back at the fingertips to the lawyer and the fee earning community. And then obviously that flows through to supporting getting that accuracy within the actuals to drive that FP&A process and broader planning processes across the firm.
Thanks very much, Paul. Okay, so also, of course, if any of you watching have questions as I'm talking to Harsh and Paul, please do let us know in exactly the same way, and I will put the questions to them. So Harsh, tell us a little more then about where Clyde & Co is on its data mining, if you like, journey in terms of unlocking this value that Chris spoke about from the perspective of Allen Overy, sort of structurally, or in terms of the technology that you're exploring, or indeed the cultural points.
Yeah, sure. I would say we are probably maybe a year behind where Chris is with Allen Overy from a data sort of understanding perspective. And what I mean by that is I find the biggest challenge for these sort of transformations is bringing the rest of the firm with you. So we do have pockets of individuals and teams who are far more eager to sort of get AI in use technology, and we too are talking about how can we sort of better leverage ChatGPT and all of these things. But when you're talking about a law firm that's 3,500 lawyers with 500 partners, they're at different stages of their own understanding of how valuable data can be. And I spend a lot of my time at the moment sort of explaining, like what Chris just did, the value of unleashing some of these valuable data points and, how can we better use tools and stuff like that. And we mustn't forget that this is not the core function of a lawyer. So this is always, something that they find is a bit more admin, and, they don't have the time to sort of actually sort of get into the nuts and bolts because they're spending a lot more time on the law. We've come a long way, and we too are sort of establishing what we call the EDP, Enterprise Data Platform. I think it's exactly the same as what Chris sort of said, the trusted data platform. It's just different terminologies, and we are also on the Azure stack. So I think Microsoft Azure themselves, together with their trusted partners, whom OneStream is one of them, is accelerating this journey through the technology. And it also interacts quite easily with Microsoft Teams, lots of the collaboration tools. We are finding that Microsoft themselves are making that transition a lot easier. So Power Apps and things like that are certain things, but technology moves so quickly that every 6 months they have an added feature that they sort of release to market, and it makes that whole collaboration piece a lot easier. And at the moment, we're also trialing, embedding Power BI dashboards within team chats and, within shared folders and things like that, which makes data consumption, I think, far easier and where required. I think that's the real shift for us as a business at Clyde, is not to wait for the end of the month to see a dashboard, or not to wait for a meeting and you send this huge deck of material and people are trying to sort of sift through it and understand what's important to them. It's how do we get the right pieces of information when they actually need it, as opposed to a particular sort of mandated time. That's where I think some of the technology is being really useful, and I can very well see where things like ChatGPT will make that even easier, right? So if you don't have to find something and you can ask your bot, a certain piece of information, that has huge opportunities.
And Chris gave us those examples of feedback from the various departments or partners about why they were seeing benefit from what he's doing. Are there particular areas where you found being able to demonstrate what partners can do differently, or the different sorts of decisions that people can make with data, and that sort of helped you build buy-in for your
definitely. I mean, for law firms generally, I think people data is key. And Chris obviously mentioned that he was head of HR, and that's a really good place to start. So even for Clyde, our HR data was where we spent the most amount of time. And particularly because lawyers move around, the associate population moves around, it's quite difficult to sort of keep track of, their progression and how they're evolving and developing and things like that. So a lot of the use cases that have resonated really well with lawyers at Clyde is particularly around utilization of teams, how busy people are, progression. We've also signed up for Mansfield Rules, which is looking at diversity within the law community, progression of diverse populations, ethnic groups. So there's a lot of non-financial information that you can uncover using data. And I think personally, that's an area that I've found where lawyers tend to engage better. Some of them, particularly at Clyde, sort of find financials or lots of tables, lots of numbers a little bit boring. And they're like, oh, here's another finance dashboard, and it's either red or green, and they sort of move on. But when you're talking about their own teams and the different dimensions within their teams, whether it be a diversity or progression through the bands and rates and things like that, they become far more engaged, and I think it's far more actionable. So where we've really had some wins is where we sort of filter down to individual practice groups and sort of show a partner, here's something you can actually action. You can change something, you can talk to someone, you can make a difference. And of course, we try to bring in a client slant as well, but starting with people and associates or, lawyers within the firm, I find is a really good place to start.
Okay. And as well as the substance of data, you refer to dashboards there, of course, and that they could be more or less compelling. What about in terms of how data is presented and visualized? Where are you on that sort of journey?
Yeah, so obviously for different forums, we have lots of different things. I'm trying to move the business away from too many PowerPoints, and we've done away with printing off lots of PDF reports and things like that. Up till about 3 years ago, we used to print off a lot of things and give to partners. Through COVID, obviously that wasn't practical, and after COVID, we sort of went essentially paperless to an extent. We're finding the interactivity of Power BI quite useful. People like to engage. It does need to be very simple. So I think one of the things that is a bit of a caution is not to overcomplicate the message and not to overcomplicate the output, because the tools can enable you to get very granular, but sometimes partners don't really need or want to get to that level of granularity. They want sound bites. We are actually trialing at currently sort of sound bites on the mobile phones, where Power BI, you do have a Power BI app, so any dashboard that you create in Power BI, you can easily sort of render it and show it on your mobile phone. But we're trying to make those messages far more targeted and sort of say, in your practice, we see this trend. If you want to have more detail, this is the dashboard you can do that from. Okay. But I think that just high level, the trend is beginning to sort of resonate with partners, and then they will go back and talk to their finance support teams or their junior associates or whatever it is. But at least they're beginning to understand that data is useful for them, right? And that's been quite successful for us.
That's really interesting. Do you push that out at particular moments then
Yes.
to sort of
So for example, we have a daily WIP fees cash report that we used to do manually. We used to send it off to the COOs of the regions together with global heads of finance. We started we put that in Power BI. We started sort of establishing the Power BI report, and since about 6 months ago, we've started pushing that out to a wider audience on their phones. They still can interact with the same report. It gets updated every day, overnight, an automatic feed, but we are slowly beginning to get them to interact with it for their own regions. And I think it really helps when senior management start asking them questions based on that same MI. So because they're all looking at the same, phone app or the same dashboard, the conversations they have is far less on the data accuracy one, but more about, that is the data, and that was your utilization for last week. What are we going to do about it, for example, right? So.
Thank you. Somebody asked if we were recording the session. Yes, we are recording this, and we will distribute it later. Still, if you do have any questions, there is still 5 minutes to let me know. I'm going to come to Paul now. Paul, we've heard a lot there about, a lot of different drivers, a lot of different challenges, and a lot of different sort of plates being spun, I suppose. But from your perspective, also seeing how businesses are working with data in other sectors, as well as obviously a few law firms. What are the sort of opportunities that firms might be missing out on that really stand out if they're not investing as firms like we've spoken to today are?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're right at the start of our journey with Clyde & Co. and with Harsh. And if we look at what Chris is achieving within Allen Overy and what Harsh touched on there, really the purpose of our partnership is to bring together those different data sources. So not only looking at that financial data, but looking at the HR data, the client, the matter data, and bringing that all together to enable the analysis at looking at that holistically. And I think Chris touched on it very well around this isn't just the responsibility of IT, this is the responsibility across the firm, and having the trust in that data is obviously critical. So for us, the opportunity really is to understand better performance, be that at a very granular level, at an individual client or matter, but then looking at that and moving that sort of up the structure and the hierarchy to understand performance at, say, a regional or a practice area level. So the kind of opportunities that we're going to help Clyde to unlock, and we've done with other firms, and we've done an awful lot in other markets, is actually understanding that actual performance, delivering that trust into the data so that you can get the buy-in that Chris and Harsh have talked to, but actually turning that data into information, turning it into something that's actionable to really help change behaviors to make data-driven decisions, I would say, is important. And unless you've got that trust and that accuracy, and unless you're looking at that holistic picture, that becomes very difficult to do. And I suppose that's probably one of the largest challenges, is that whole change management piece of looking at how individuals interact with data so that they can really understand how it's going to enrich the roles that they do.
I was going to ask about the change management, actually. This could be for you as well, Harsh. Is there a particular challenge, obstacle when it comes to getting people to think about data differently or behave differently with the data opportunities that you're giving them, or indeed managing such a diverse sort of project that is particularly difficult to overcome in a law firm environment?
Yeah, to pick up on that. So I think the biggest challenge is data quality. So making sure that whatever tools you're implementing, you can drill back into that source data so that you can deliver the proof of where that data is coming from. But this is very much a journey over time. And for ourselves, this is about building a partnership and looking at what are the key wins that we can deliver value back quickly to start to take people on that journey. And I think if you try and boil the ocean, for a better term, and try and do everything at once, people aren't going to see the value, and the time it takes to go and deliver those outputs is going to be too great. So it's understanding within your firm, what are those key challenges that you can help to solve, be that looking at something like lockup as a very good example, and seeing how you can start to improve cash flow within the firm, and looking at what those key wins are going to be that are going to help to recognize that value. And then from there, you can start to build the buy-in and deliver that change management in terms of how people interact with data.
And yeah, if I just add on to Paul's point, I think what we find is, although most of our law firms are relatively large, lots of lawyers and geographically dispersed and in multiple countries, partners themselves manage a relatively small unit within that large law firm. So at Clyde, the average partner would always be working with 5 to 10 sort of associates, and when they work on a case, that is their small team. So you've got to have the ability within the data, and to Paul's point, the accuracy of the data, to be able to, one, consolidate at a global level, because the global leaders want to see, how the firm is doing at a, the full 4,000 lawyer level. But then for the individual partner, it's more important to be able to get to, how is his 6 individuals, somewhat of a small business within a large business, doing. And that's where I think the data, if you get the right data model and you get the right tools, you can go through those multiple levels seamlessly, instead of having a huge overhead function trying to support all of those requests. I mean, that's the aim, actually. And, obviously that's a journey. So.
Okay. Yes. Interesting. Thank you, Harsh. And thank you everybody. We're at the hour now. So I'd like to thank Chris, of course, Chris at Allen Overy, Chris Pannell, for his presentation. Harsh Amanasoria at Clyde & Co. That was really interesting. Thank you, Harsh. And of course, Paul Suffield from OneStream Software. And I hope, and thank you all for coming along today to listen to us. And I hope to see you at another event soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.